Welcome to Draft Sickos on the No Ceilings NBA YouTube channel and podcast feed. This is the show where we discuss everybody from the biggest of names to the deepest of sleepers. I'm your host, Maxwell Baumbach, and tonight I am joined by the one and only Chuck from Chucking Darts. Chuck, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me back, Maxwell. It's another season of college hoops. Let's get it going.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I really wanted specifically to have you on for this episode because I feel like one of the things I enjoy most about your work in the draft content space is consistently going back to what the task at hand is, which is finding guys who are going to play in the NBA. And what does that look like? How do you define roles? What types of roles can a player fill? How valuable are those roles? I feel like you've always done a great job of sort of bringing it back to that. Because I think a lot of times we can either get overly wrapped up into micro skills or focus on things that, you know, maybe don't matter as much. And I think just constantly bringing it back to what is the league right now? How does this guy fit into it? And where is the league going? And what does that value proposition look like is so important. And that's why I wanted to talk to you specifically about perplexing prospects. And that's kind of a vague term, right? But it's guys that we just think are maybe a little bit confusing in one way or another. In the name that you brought up, we brought up two each, but one guy that you brought up was Tyon Grant Foster from Grand Canyon, who has had quite the winding journey. He's a 6'7" sort of forward. I'm going to kind of just kick it over to you. Like, let's just, I guess, start from square one. Like, for people unfamiliar with Tyon Grant Foster, who is he? What's his deal, and what makes him so perplexing?
Well, okay. I'll say that Tyon's story is as perplexing as it is heartwarming because he played JUCO starting in 2018, 2019, I believe. Played JUCO for a couple years, and then was like a big time intended piece for Kansas, I believe, starting in 2020. I don't know if he would have overlapped with the Dotson as a Buki team or maybe the team after that, maybe post-pandemic. But anyway, he got to Kansas, had some sort of health concern, and he never really caught on in the way that he was intended to. And so he transfers to DePaul for the 2021 season. His first half at DePaul, he scores like 9 or 10 points. He's looking really good. And then he goes back for halftime and he collapses in the locker room. And there's concerns that it was some sort of COVID complication and health problem. And he basically is just, his career is completely on hold for 2 years as doctors, family, support system, himself, make sure that he is, like, his health is okay just to live a normal life, let alone play high-level competitive hoops. But he finally gets cleared ahead of last season, and then he catches on at Grand Canyon, which, like, I don't even know if Grand Canyon really existed and had a basketball team when he started his journey in 2018. But yeah, so he catches on there at the campus in Arizona and plays, I believe, in the West Coast Conference and is one of the best players in that conference. I don't remember whether he was player of the year last year or not.
So he was in the WAC, which is like
Western
just such
Athletic.
Like a bizarre like mix of teams, but actually quite a good mid-major league. Like, there's been a lot of good coaches that have come out of there. A lot of 20-win teams. Like, it's a mid-major that doesn't get a lot of love from like a draft standpoint, but there is a lot of talent in it. Like, it's not a bottom feeder league.
Well, and I mean, his stats across the board were really, really good last year. 20 points a game, 6 rebounds a game, 1.5 assists, but with a negative assist to turnover ratio, which I'll get to. But with all of that offensive usage, 1.7 steals, 1.5 blocks for the true. We like the term sickos on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
For the sickos, that is a nearly 5% block rate, a nearly 3% steal rate for someone bearing like a big offensive burden. And this is not an offensive burden where like you're sort of an off-ball player and your usage is tied to moving off the ball and then launching threes without ever getting to the line. He drew 8 free throws a game. And in the NCAA tournament, they played St. Mary's because they won their conference. Mm-hmm. They played St. Mary's, who's always like this sexy pick come tournament time because they're like a 5 or a 6 seed and they have great defense and they have all these, Aussies on the team. And, that they like basically ran St. Mary's off the floor in the first round. Yeah. And he was by far the most athletic player on the floor. Then they play Alabama, who eventually made it to the Final Four or the national title game. Were they?
They were Final Four. Yeah, they played UConn in the semifinal, if I remember.
And then UConn played Purdue. You're right.
Yeah.
God, jeez, what is my life become?
Oh, you're fine.
Okay, so they play Alabama, who's the eventual Final Four team. They take Alabama all the way down to the wire. And again, Tyon is the most explosive, most athletic two-way player on the floor. Like, in my opinion, by far. In those two, I'd have to double check. I'll look it up real quick. But I believe off the top of my head, because I saved this as a stat for last draft cycle when I thought he was going to enter. I believe in those 2 games, he drew 28 free throws. This is a very...
It was, yeah. Oh my God.
No, 30.
No, it was 30. Yeah, it was 30.
30
free
throws.
St. Mary's and 16 against Alabama.
And Saint, I mean, Alabama is like an up and down run and gun team. That's high possession basketball. 16 free throws is still ridiculous. I doubt any other individual player drew 16 free throws against Alabama the entire season. But St. Mary's is like a disciplined defense first, low mistake. Like that has been their identity.
I was going to say a very fundamentally sound defensive team between like Joshua Jefferson and like Mitchell Saxon's one of those guys where like the stocks numbers are never good, but like he's always very in control as a defensive anchor. Like, yeah. It's not a team that you would imagine getting to the line that much against.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like, he looked like he belonged in a higher league is the easiest way to put it. Yes. That's what all of this amounts to. If we want to have some more fun, I'll just read very quickly his numbers. His last 6 games, which included that performance, so that's basically through his conference tournament and those 2 title games. His scoring output was looks to be about 25 a game, 24, 25 a game. And his stock numbers, steals plus blocks, were consecutively in these 6 games 3, 5, 5, 4, 4, 5. Like this guy, he is an overwhelming talent. In my opinion, if he were just in terms of pure athleticism, if he were in the NBA today, he would be a 90th plus percentile NBA athlete. Because remember, he's 6'7" and 210 pounds.
I was going to say, like, my introduction to him was like in our No Ceiling Slack. Tyler Rucker brought him up like very early in the year and was like, go check out this guy. He is like an elite athlete. And I was like, oh, okay. And like mentally, like I just auto corrected that to be like, oh, he's probably like a good athlete for like the mid-major level.
Right. Of course.
Then you watch him and it's like, oh no, like this man should not be allowed to play against these guys. Like this is not okay. Like they got to get him out of here.
And when you consider how much time he had off and the fact that he was like a low-minute player as like a 20-year-old for Kansas way back in the day. And then again, he collapses his first game at DePaul. There was I don't know what sort of expectation anyone could have had for him going into last year about like, what does his offensive game even look like? Who knows? And so with those qualifiers, he made 53s, got 150 of them up, 33%, and on a million free throws, 280 free throws, he shot about 75% from the line, which like, how does anyone judge what those numbers mean given his like once in a lifetime context? But I tend to think that is pretty encouraging. And when you watch, like, he's a big thing with me with athletic players is whether or not their shot looks athletic or if their shot looks very kind of stilted because it's been repped in sort of low stress gym environments and they're trying to build it up one step at a time. His shot looks athletic, gets way up off the ground, can shoot it. I won't say off full movement or anything, but he can shoot it a little bit off of relocation. He can shoot it off the dribble. And then when he drives, it's just go ahead and try and stop me. So he turned 24 in March. And I figured that this means like it's time to go to the NBA. Like 24 is really pushing the age where you can really get in and start playing in the league. But then surprisingly to me, at least, he got some feedback in the combine, and then I think he withdrew even from scrimmages. I don't think he even scrimmaged.
Okay.
And then basically announced quietly that he withdrew. And now he's going to be back at Grand Canyon. He's the preseason West Coast Conference Player of the Year. So in terms of perplexing, like that sort of story tells itself about what is perplexing about him.
Yeah.
I think that if he's mocked anywhere, I'm sure it's in like the late second round because an NBA team is going to be like, this guy's 25. What are his medicals look like? How could we possibly clear him? Like, this is crazy, So,
and I don't believe, I could be wrong, but I feel like there was no report that I am aware of, at least. It was like he didn't get played by fitness to play committee at the NBA level. You know what I mean? I'm not aware of the league being like, he can't play.
So like
that's what I'm saying. It's like, I don't think that there's been like a definitive, like he's not going to get cleared.
I didn't see anything like that either. What I read was like very standard. This was a valuable process for me. It was really important to get feedback.
Sure.
I'm going to be more of a leader, and like his coach is hyping him up in the preseason. He's so much better than he was 5 months ago, blah, 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 blah. Which is great. Like, I think that I don't know. I haven't looked at preseason All-America lists, but for me, like he is a very clear, at minimum, second team All-American pick. Right. I think he should be a preseason first team All-American, and I doubt that he is because I still think no one knows what to do with him. But that at 6'7", I did a podcast episode before the combine with
Brian, right? Very good episode, right? By the way, like still relevant for the guys that went back to school. Like
I know because so many of them like went back a week later. We were like, man,
Brian is like so great to listen to. Like his enthusiasm for basketball and the players that he likes gets me so fired up. Like great episode.
He's the man. Big influence on my work at Brian J Draft. But we talked about him, and he like the player that he or the players that he connected Tyon to are the Thompson twins. He's like, in terms of actual athleticism, if you want to approximate what this guy is capable of, that's the level you have to go to. And the Thompsons are, don't have any sort of health history and are younger. Like they'll be even stronger by the time they're Tyon's age, right? But in terms of sort of being able to explode and change direction and do it forcefully, and then just sort of jump and levitate and, erase and recover stuff. That is the kind of guy we're talking about. Maybe not quite Thompson level, but if you're a B- Thompson, you're very clearly an NBA player. And he has shooting this shooting sample that neither of the Thompsons do. I'm not trying to say that he should go in the top 10 of next year's draft, but I am trying to say that if he has a first team All-America kind of year, kind of think how Keegan Murray had like this two-way incredible year for Iowa a couple years ago after being a relative late bloomer and a more defense-ish prospect the year before. If he has that kind of a two-way year, NBA teams will be faced with a very interesting question regarding this kid's age and what this means for his development. That is what is perplexing about him. We just before we started the show, I was like, well, the last guy I feel like who really carved out an NBA career coming into the league really, comparatively late, it was like a European player like Bogdan Bogdanovic. I don't think he came over until he was like 25, 26. And it's not the same because the game reps are not the same. Like Bogdan, I think, was like a EuroLeague Final Four MVP or something before he came over.
Yeah.
Which is, not the whack or whatever. But in terms of whether or not it is possible for a player that old to acclimate to the NBA after, this kind of shorter runway of high level ball, I tend to think it is possible. There's nothing to suggest to me that it isn't because there's never been someone this athletic at this age entering the league.
Yeah, normally. So I did a thing last year on Jaden Ledee when he had like that super hot start to the year.
Yeah.
And I was like not a Jaden Ledee guy, just like for transparency. But like one of the big things I looked into were like, who are the older guys who stuck? And they were all like old, high volume 3-point shooters. Like it was like Buddy Hield, like Sam Merrill, like it was all like Sam Hauser, like it was all guys where it's like this dude is here late because like he was never super enticing, but like boy can he knock down a jump shot. And like with Tyon, the reason that he is here late has nothing to do with his skill. It's just that he wasn't on a basketball court. So it's like so different that it's like you can't even use that against him. That it's like, oh, well, like usually they're shooters. It's like, well, yeah, but usually like they played college basketball for a full season before being 25, like 24. Yeah. Like this is not anything within his controllables.
And athletes of his caliber get drafted by the time they're 21.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what happens when you're that athletic. And I think like in terms of his skill set, he had a negative ATO pretty substantially because, and again, you can view that two ways. Oh, he's this old and he still doesn't have the vision. How do you develop vision? Do you develop it when you're 17, 18, 19? You can have that train of thought, or you could say this guy's circumstances are historically unique. And he was basically, I think probably learning as he went last year because he's trying to find out what his body can do in a competitive environment. And this year, it will be telling if that can reverse itself a little bit and he can eliminate some of the tunnel vision that he has on drives. I think big picture, he is likely, let's say he makes the NBA, which would be awesome. Everything after that would be gravy, frankly.
Yeah.
But if he were to make the NBA, he would need to have a good amount of off-ball utility because even I, who had a first-round grade on him last year before he withdrew, I wasn't thinking that he's going to be like a top 3 offensive option on a given team. Yeah. So if you're not that, you need to have a lot of defensive versatility, which I think he probably can have.
Yeah.
And you need to have a very sort of, at minimum, sort of a low-waist off-ball game, something that can complement star talent. And so how his drive game looks this year, it may just be that he just attacks the rim again because he'll just draw another 300 free throws. And what are you going to do? But how his sort of vision off of closeouts and things like that look is something I'm going to be paying attention to with him to see if that off-ball game starts to come into focus a little bit.
For sure.
There's no one I'm rooting for more in the college game than Tyon entering this cycle. And so, and I think everyone, he included, knows like this is it. Like, you're going to turn 25, 2 years. You're already basically too good for your conference as it is. So make your impression and then give it a shot, and we'll see what happens. Or draft time in the spring.
For sure, yeah. So a couple of like quick notes, like for people that are like, why is he still at Grand Canyon? Like, without going too deep into it, Grand Canyon has a lot of money around it. So there is like they have bags, like they've got bags. Like this is not a case of like he's too scared to go play in the SEC. Like I am sure he is making quite a bit of money where he's at.
And plus, given that they took a chance on him and cleared him, like he was looking, like in his circumstance, you want an environment that you can trust and that you like and that you're comfortable in. I mean, of course, this isn't like, to contrast it to like AJ Mitchell, and I don't know AJ's circumstances, so I don't want to talk down on it, but he played at UC Santa Barbara, right? That was it.
Yep.
Yeah, for like all 4 years. And he's someone who I thought probably could have done well by transferring his last couple of years just to get more high-level reps. But he got drafted and he's in a great organization. So what do I know? But like, you know.
Yeah, it would have been a little easier to dissect the film if he'd been somewhere a little bigger. So with Tyon, I'm gonna get kind of my concerns out of the way. The first one I think is, again, just like perplexing, which is I'm a little bit lower on how the shot looks. Like, I feel like he goes across his body a little bit. The release is a little funky. When he pulls up in particular, I feel like the apex of his shot is kind of low. But then, like, you look at his numbers against uncontested threes, and they're good. So it's like, well, he does jump really high. So like maybe that just kind of like takes care of itself a little bit. I do think the passing is like a real issue. Like that's something that has to get better. I'm hoping for like what I call the Ricky Council leap, where like Ricky Council from sophomore year to junior year was like, oh man, like that guy gets downhill really well. And then junior year, it's like, oh, and now he's like not just doing stuff for himself, but like other guys now as he goes downhill. Like
that's a great comparison, the Ricky Council leap. That's right. They're in similar kinds of guys for sure.
So that's like one thing I'm hoping to see for him is just to kind of tighten that up. And then like I just love everything else about his game. Like defensively, really strong rotational awareness. Like to your point, for a high usage guy to like just consistently be like low in his stance on the ball and like playing with such a high motor in transition. Like I have so many, I don't know that there's a guy that I have more like positive body language notes on than Tyon. Like he's one of those guys who's always like super fired up and like running to pick teammates up off the floor. Like it's cheesy stuff, but it's like, man, that guy just plays with a lot of energy.
Man, it's when it's him, it's not cheesy. This isn't some offensively tilted, you know, wing shooter slapping the floor because it's an 8-0 run. Like the phrase plays every game like it's their last is overused, but if it were ever appropriate for any player, it would be Tyon. So he's incredible to watch. He's incredible.
So let's talk a little bit about, like, let's say you are a team and you're able to pick him up. I think like the first thing that's interesting that's worth discussing is just like the stock perspective. Because like we made draft boards for No Ceiling this recently. And it's like, I don't know where to put this guy because of the age. And then it's like, if he does have like a slower start this year, if he's not progressing, does it then become one of those things where like, he's not really even in the draft conversation. He's more competing against like just guys on the margins is like a two-way guy. Like, is it sort of the Demoy Hodge predicament? And like, granted, he brings so much more potential value than a guy like Hodge did coming out. Like Hodge came out old, but it's like, well, he's like an off-ball tiny guard who weighs 170 pounds. Like with Tyon, we're talking about a
shout out to Demoy. Is he still in the G League? Is he somewhere?
I think he went overseas. I could be wrong, but I
think he'll get paid overseas. Good player.
For sure. But with Tyon, it's like he's got a 7-foot wingspan and he weighs 215 pounds, and like the defensive value is off the charts. So in terms of role, are we thinking like mega Dorian Finney-Smith? Are we thinking like jumbo Keon Ellis with like less of a playmaking tinge to it? Like,
man, you are just in mid-season form. These comps are good, man.
Okay, Keon's another one. I've been working on my comp game, but
well, Keon's another one who entered late, and now you see him like he's the starting shooting guard, you know, to start the season for the Sacramento Kings. And Keon, even though he's laterally very, very quick, never had the downhill game that Tyon had. He was more of a high volume 3-point shooter. Alabama kid. But I would say, are you saying what would my impression of him be if he starts out slow at Grand Canyon? Is that
So like, I guess my question is just like, if you get him within your NBA organization, like what ideally is the kind of like the role that you're trying to slot him into? Like, Like, who do you
Good
think he plays
question.
like in the NBA, I guess, is how I'd put it.
It's hard. I don't know. Like Oubre? I
Oh,
don't
that's
even
kind of an
know.
interesting one. Yeah, because Oubre is also just like a guy that like you don't want doing a lot with the ball, but like he can do stuff. Like he can make shots.
And he would like to do stuff. It's like
yeah.
it's difficult because I'm uncomfortable saying it for sure because his circumstances are so crazy. Like if I were an NBA team and he puts up just similar numbers, let's say like the shooting numbers stay relatively the same, the assist turnover doesn't like really change.
Okay.
And we're just faced with like this same guy a year older, but he like wins player of the year or whatever.
Yeah.
If that happens, I would still like I would consider him in like the 30s. I would consider him a top 40 player.
I think especially with like the CBA now too, where it's just like, I don't know, if you can get a guy, if you think he's an NBA player and you can get him on a cheap deal in the second round, it's like, do you want to do that? Or do you want to take a guy that like you don't really believe in?
Yeah. And
like, I think that the chance of him getting drafted is so much higher now in this environment instead of like 4 years ago where the second round was kind of a scam. Like, I think we're just in a different environment now.
Well,
and like, this year with like better players getting taken in the second.
I think the smart teams will, like, there are teams who take the second round seriously and then, you know, some who do not. But I'd say that another player who I think had a really good senior year, I don't remember if I know there was an off the court controversy and a police investigation about this guy, and he's still sort of hanging around the NBA, is Keontae Johnson. I think he's on a two-way somewhere. But when he was because he had the health issue.
He had the health issue
Florida,
and an off.
And then he had the police investigation, like I think the sex assault allegation at Kansas State that I believe he was cleared from, but I don't remember. But
I think it was charges were dropped, which is
which
tricky.
Means the charges were dropped. So,
yes,
right.
Yeah.
So anyway, that is in terms of another very like unique path. You know, he at Kansas State, that was when they had Marquise Noel. Keontae was on that team that made that turning run. The Thunder drafted him, and like he couldn't really crack the Thunder rotation. Now he's somewhere else in the NBA, like with a chance. But he's another guy who is like athletic wing, strongly built, negative assist to turnover ratio, and he hasn't yet found the off-ball game to like really find himself a role. But I would say even Keontae is not of the same athletic profile as Tyon.
No. Yeah, so, he was really strong and like big, but
he was like thick, but he was like a thick 6'5". And
yeah.
I think kind of not the wingspan that Tyon has. I just think that Tyon's a little bit better. So I would say
blur,
like another late blooming, not with any of the injury history or health scares or anything like that, but another really late blooming wing who has found his role, like, and is going to be a starter for another 10 years is Herb Jones. You know, Herb didn't average more than 10 points a game until his senior year. Now he ends up being SEC player of the year. But in terms of athletic profile, you know, Herb, that sort of like wiry strength, that I think is sort of, he and Tyon, I think, are in the same ballpark athletically, is if what we're talking about. Now, again, Herb, all these high level reps, you know, he was a legend.
He was on the ball a lot in
Tuscaloosa. Yes. And he had more passing vision even in college as a wing than Tyon has shown. But if there's some sort of a spectrum from like a Keontae Johnson type, and then there's Ricky Council, and then there's Herb Jones. If you think that Tyon is somewhere there, then that is worth a top 45 pick at the very least.
100%.
And I still think his athletic juice and his effort, his ability to produce two ways like this would nudge him towards the positive end of that spectrum is what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the more I talk this out, the more I have to just get over the age and like put him higher. Because at the end of the day, like we're talking undoubtable like NBA physical traits. Not like outlier defensive production, but like really great defensive production, especially like high end defensive production. And yeah, a guy who can ultimately score efficiently and get to the line a lot and attack downhill. And like just needs to be able to shoot it okay. Like if he just shoots it okay, you can at least, I don't know, like I'm coming around to the idea, and we'll talk about it. I think I'll just save it for the next guy. So we'll do a quick break.
Okay.
We're gonna jump to Johni Broome. So stick with us. We'll be right back. All right. So with Johni Broome, he is going into his, I believe, his graduate year this year. So he's a center who measured at like 6'9", 7'1" wingspan. Like he had the Deron Holmes measurements, where it's like, oh, he's like a little like undersized, like height and wingspan wise for a guy who's going to be a full-time 5. Not like the heaviest guy, but really strong, like really, really strong and tough. And if you look at the advanced numbers, he's at Auburn now. He started at Morehead State. Just like great across the board. Like if you just compare his stats to the stats of centers who stuck around the NBA long term, there's not a box he doesn't check. Super high usage, 30.3 usage rate last season, BPM over 14, good offensive rebounder, good defensive rebounder, always been a stellar shot blocker, career block rate of 10.5, gets a decent amount of steals for a big man, slowly sort of transformed himself from this like down low and enforcer at Morehead to a guy who takes jump shots. He takes over 5 threes per 100 possessions, which is a really good mark for a big. Made 35.4% of them, which is, pretty solid. Really just, he's good. He's good at basketball. This is where I kind of want to tie it back to the discussion we were having about Tyon is we've been doing an internal exercise at No Ceilings, and we've been looking at guys who are on rookie scale contracts, and you look at them and you go through and you're like, man, a lot of these guys were guys that when they were coming out, they're the Herb Joneses, the Jaime Jaquez's, the Keegan Murrays, these guys where you look at them and you're like, that guy's old. Like I'm sure that, they're going to find a place in the league. But I'm going to roll the dice on this guy instead. I'm going to kind of bump him down. And then like, you look back a couple years later and it's like, I'd rather just have Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Jaime Jaquez, these guys that came in a little bit older that like, you knew like, oh yeah, that guy, like he's going to play in the NBA and I'm sure he'll be all right. And then like, they end up just kind of getting undervalued and underdrafted. And I'm wondering like, am I being too conservative with Johni Broome? Is like, I love him at the top of the second round. And should I just get over it and be like, this is actually a first round talent? Where I think it does get tricky is we go back to those measurements and then you look at the bar for centers in the modern NBA now. And I think a lot of them are a little bit more athletic than him and a little bit more skilled than him. I think he's a good passer, but not a great one. Like he had a really good assist rate. But like if, again, to go back to the Deron comparison, like Deron could like really put it on the deck and like do some interesting stuff with the ball. Or Kyle Filipowski checks that box too. Where like, if he's not a floor spacer and he's not a lob target, like it just gets a little bit tricky as to like where he scores offensively. And then like defensively, is he able to have the same impact when everyone's really athletic? Guys are stronger than him. Like, does it scale? And then like, how high are you willing to draft a guy that like, if he's not a starter, but then it's just like a decent backup center, like how comfortable are you with that? So I threw a lot at you. But I guess just let's kind of start with like, where do you feel comfortable with Johni Broome? And am I overreacting by getting a little too like, am I overthinking this? Do I have him too low?
I actually don't think that you're overthinking it. I think so. Johni also is a bit of a polarizing player in our little community because he's like a BPM god. And there are people, smart people, who look at someone's BPM, and if you have a BPM of like 13 or whatever he had, something crazy, then they're just like underrated, like top 20, take him, don't be stupid, take him. And a lot of times they're right.
Yeah.
With Johni, with Johni, I think the key to me is his face-up game. If he can, if he, because he has a little bit of a threat to shoot, like he is shooting threes. If he is a little bit of a threat to shoot, I want to see him really access a face-up game to where he is a constant mismatch for whoever is trying to guard him inside the arc. Because that was something I underrated about Jaquez. I got hung up on, well, how athletic is he really? And his three-point numbers and free throw numbers aren't where I really want him to be. And I ended up underrating him, like missing him. If I were a GM in that draft, I would not have ended up with Jaime Jaquez.
Yep. Same.
And like what he did so well was he had this incredible footwork inside the arc, and he was so smart that he was a constant mismatch in his preferred spots. And he had enough defensive like versatility and know-how to be able to play inside and out. Johni has a bit more of a challenge because I don't really think he can defend on the perimeter at the NBA level. Like I would be surprised if he could really hold up out there. To me, when I look at him, I sort of think about like Okongwu, for example, another guy who not ideal dimensions, clearly good, like was immediately good at USC. You know, he was a one and done and is still a very good player, but doesn't, you know, he isn't a starter like a lot of folks projected him to be, at least not yet. He's kind of blocked by a more traditional, rim running lob threat. Exactly. And so it's just sort of like, where is a team going to make space for like a clearly good player, but who's sort of an undersized big who hasn't proven that he can shoot? If Johni comes along with the face-up game, then there will be a place for him somewhere. Someone who rebounds that well and who can like protect the rim either in sort of a backup five way or maybe even coming off the weak side. There will be a place for him if he can shoot or if he has that face-up game. Is it a place that I would prioritize as a team? Probably not. I would probably count on beating Johni rather than like needing Johni in my building. But he could prove me wrong. I mean, it's possible. It's just with bigs, I mean, you look at the average. I wish I had like the average wingspan measurements for starting fives in the NBA, but I'm sure now it's like 7'4", 7'5".
It's in that range.
So like it just becomes hard to count on that player to provide the real difference. Now, if you feel like he can be sort of a Xavier Tillman-y level defender, then maybe, but even Xavier, who's good, is on his second team, and they reap the benefits of it, but the Grizzlies didn't reap the benefits of drafting him that much. So it's a debate for sure. I just don't know how essential a target he would be.
Yeah. Like I think he's very clearly like to me at least, like a guy who will like be because like he's gonna like to your point, like he's gonna rebound, he's going to set screens, he's like going to play competent drop coverage defense, like he's not going to make dumb decisions with the ball and make a coach rip their hair out. Like he can do enough. I think again it just kind of comes back to like the face-up game where like is he going to be like a center who shoots some threes, or is he going to be like a center who legitimately spaces the floor? Because like if he's a center who takes some threes, like that's one thing. But if you can like actually draw a closeout, or like you really have to make sure like you can't get too cute with your coverage or be too cheap and drop. If he sets a pick and pop, like then it becomes sort of a different conversation. And then it turns to your point, like the overall face-up game skill set of like, well, then can he drive? Can he put the ball on the floor? Is he going to be able to counter to get his man off balance? Like if he's able to do any of that, then like 100%, I think you get a lot more excited about him. If we just kind of see the same stuff this year, like I think that's a guy who's fine, like, but I think it's a little bit less interesting.
Yeah. I think it is more likely that he is a center who shoots threes rather than like a gravity threat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And he's done great to expand his range. And I'm sure he's making 7 figures at Auburn. So, good for him. Because they rely on him so much on the inside, it's going to be another full season of reps where most of his touches are coming on the inside. That's where he's going to be accustomed to playing. And so in order to become an NBA 3-point gravity threat, like you really need to rep that out the same way you need to rep out anything else. And I think he will not get in the habit of shooting that amount of threes until he's in the league. And so that's just hard. It's, Miles Turner is the exception, not the rule, of someone who like builds out that gravity, and teams still kind of strategically leave Miles Turner open. So that's a tall mountain to climb for Johni. That's why I want to see him just dominate inside the arc to where like shoot some threes to try to find some sort of Tillman-y role, which is still a good role. Like Xavier's going to be around for another 5 years. So maybe that is his future. I don't know.
What I'm interested to see is like, I feel like this time of year, every college coach is like, we're just going to play our 2 bigs together. Like Matt Painter is like the king of that. We're going to play Edie and Trevion together all the time. And like, it didn't really happen. Like right now there's been a little bit of Bruce Pearl saying that he's going to play Broome and Dylan Cardwell together, which I like kind of hope happens. Like I would kind of like to see him at the 4, just so that we get the shots repped out. The question I have for you off of that is like, how valuable is like the big who's kind of a 4 at this point? Like the idea of him as a 4, because it's like some teams will play those lineups and it's like, yeah, sometimes like you can play, and then other games like you just can't. Like against Minnesota, like Johni Broome at the 4 is okay. Or against like when Boston goes to the big lineups and like Al Horford and Porzingis are out there, then Broome at the 4 is okay. But like I just wonder from a team building standpoint, like, is that something that we're going to see more of, or is it still just kind of like, that's a thing you can do sometimes? Because I kind of lean more toward the latter.
The way I'd put it is teams will try to put as much size on the floor as they possibly can, because I think that is still ingrained in coaches' minds that you want a lot of size on the floor, number one. And number 2, I still think it's true that having more skilled size is the way to go, as long as you're not sacrificing offensive efficiency. So that puts the onus on a guy like Johni to be a relatively efficient player, at the NBA level. And he knows he's going to have to shoot threes, and he's going to have to be really decisive and really efficient with his limited touches. But, draft history says that the players who become efficient role players are high usage guys who scale everything down. And that is him. He will scale everything down. And so that's where that BPM stuff really comes up again. So do I think that it will be the norm to play 2 bigs? Like, it will be the norm as long as there are 2 efficient offensive bigs to play. As long as those 2 exist on a team, a coach is going to give it a look. And so I remain skeptical that Johni can get to a starter level doing that, just because I don't think he's, if you compare him to Julius Randle or Karl Anthony Towns or Naz Reid, or non-Timberwolves like Horford or something like that. Like I don't think he's in the athletic class of those players.
I would agree.
Which is why I think he's more of in sort of like rotational land. But that is still an NBA player, and if you can hold your own offensively, a coach is going to play a sound defensive big man who rebounds the hell out of the ball and who can pass. If they can hold their own as a scoring threat, just hold their own, those minutes will find him. So but like I said, in terms of prioritizing it, I don't know about prioritizing it, but he can find a spot.
Yeah. It almost becomes, and like Jalen Smith shot the piss out of the ball last year, but it kind of becomes like can he be a Jalen Smith kind of guy?
Yeah.
Where like
I mean,
he's obviously like stronger down low than Jalen Smith is.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, I think he's probably a bit of a better mover than Jalen, but Jalen just got 3 years and like what 30 million,
Yeah,
327 in the
like a real
offseason.
contract. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's gonna be the backup center for a team whose starting center is a little iffy. So he might start NBA games this year. You know, there you can come up with worse fates for a player for sure. I think
but again, it's just the thing of like if your wife woke you up in the middle of the night, it's like Chuck, our team, they just got Jalen Smith. You're like I'm going back to bed. You know what I mean? Like it's not changing your day.
If that happened, I would probably stay awake because I would feel like my wife is going through some sort of episode, and I would like I need to spring into like husband mode. But yes, I agree. But like the level that the questions that you're asking kind of suggest about whether your ranking of him is inappropriate or whether he's like not an NBA guy. I do think he is deserving of a real deal NBA shot. He should get drafted. And if he doesn't get a guarantee, then he should get a 2-way and like he'll go dominate the G League because there's no bigs in the G League.
He is like 1000% the type of like big that if you put in the G League, he will average like 20 and 14.
That's right. And so that means he'll get his chance. He will get multiple chances to impress for sure. And if you want to have, I mean, I tend to think that high IQ, good defense bigs are just good to have in your organization, even if you don't have grand plans for them minutes wise on the court for your NBA team. You just like practice habits and, helping your young players along by communicating correctly where they should be on defense, work ethic. I just think that's sort of like good stuff to have.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to be, if you find yourself needing to teach your big men how to play defense, like your team is going to suck for a while. So you need to have someone there who knows what they're doing. And so that'll help Johni as well.
And I still think the league is like quietly low on backup centers, which has been, I don't know. We've seen a lot of guys that just get like retread contracts year after year, and the team's fan base is like, oh, this guy's not very good. Well, that's kind of just they're around, and coaches know that they can play in an NBA game, so they're comfortable rolling them out there. But there's a lot of teams that I can look at right now, like just looking at Basketball Reference, where it's like they could use an upgrade. I think that's going to give him a window for opportunity, even if I don't really see like starter value out of him.
Like, would the Phoenix Suns be better off with Johni than like Mason Plumlee at this stage of Mason's career? I could have that conversation. It's certainly possible. So yeah.
I think there's a lot of teams that you can look at, and just even if he's like your third big, it's like I would feel he could be like a second and a half big. You know what I mean? Where it's like there's a lot of teams where it could be debatable whether or not he's your second or third best center, and that's fine. I just don't know that I can get to the point of like, is he a true false ceiling prospect? Like I feel like we would have seen a little bit more of him on the ball if that was the case at this point.
Don't go chasing Nas Reeds. It's hard. This is really hard.
100%. So we're gonna do one more break. We're gonna come back. We're gonna talk about Cedric Coward and Derik Queen. Stick with us. So we're going to talk about Washington State's Cedric Coward up next, 6'6", 7-foot wingspan. I'm like big into Cedric Coward, so I'm excited to see kind of where you go with it. But what are your feelings on Cedric, and what has him in your kind of perplexing bucket?
Well, I don't know the next time we're going to get to talk about Cedric. We have messaged about Cedric plenty over the last 12 months. So I wanted to bring him up if for no other reason than that one. But what is perplexing about him is that he has the athletic profile of an NBA player. Like you just mentioned, 6'6", 7-foot wingspan, plenty athletic, very athletic. He started his career at D3, I think Willamette University, stayed in the Northwest, joined up with Eastern Washington the last couple of years. The coach, I think the last name is Riley, maybe David Riley, just went from Eastern Washington to Washington State. Cedric followed him, so now he will be at Washington State in the new West Coast Conference. So he'll be playing Gonzaga, Santa Clara, San Francisco, whoever else is there from the dissolved Pac-12. And so he is an extremely efficient scorer, like on the page. He, I think, scored 16 a game last year. He was first team all conference in the Big Sky, but he shot 72% at the rim. And a lot of his shots were like mismatch post-ups because he was just the strongest, most athletic guy on his team, probably the most athletic guy in his league. And so they just posted him up and they said, our bet is that no defender can really hang with him down there and that we'll just take our chances dumping it down to him. But he got his three-point volume up to an acceptable level. Like he made 45 threes at 38%, and he didn't draw as many fouls as I'd like him to, and we can talk about that, but he shot 90% from the line. So when you have touch like that and you are someone who could theoretically hang on the wing in the NBA, then you should be getting some draft noise. And I think like you and I and like Caleb from On the Clock, we're the ones trying to make noise about Cedric, but it's the sort of thing where he's been so athletic that the team, I don't believe, has leaned enough into developing his ball skills. That's what I really think he needs to do this year. And they might be far enough away where he's more of a 2026 draft guy than a 2025 draft guy. He just turned 21 in September.
Young for the class, yes.
So he can, by the 2026 draft, he'll be 22, like a normal senior age 22. And so maybe he takes 2 years at like basically high level, high major basketball now, since these West Coast Conference kind of beefed up. And with 2 seasons there, maybe by the end of his second season, he's an all conference performer. And he still has that athleticism and he still has that touch. And then all of a sudden, he's like a real deal prospect. For all of it to come together this season, I think is ambitious because I still think his coach is going to want to use him in a similar way as he has at Eastern Washington. And I don't think that playing out of the post that much and not, running a lot of pick and roll, which he did some, but not enough, in my opinion. Not getting used to that stuff, I think, is going to keep him towards the back end of any conversation anyone has about the draft this year.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think under the new like COVID rule, like whatever system, I think they counted that first D3 year. So I do think he's auto eligible after this year.
So you don't think he can come back for another one?
I don't believe so. I believe it's just this year. I'm checking draft entry 2025. Yep.
Man,
so he's got to go.
Annoying.
So what I will say is I know the ball skills have been a big point of emphasis within the program this year. So it is something they're looking to develop in him. I kind of think he might take a leap there. Like, so I did Cedric. Every year I pick like one guy to do twice for No Stone Unturned. Like I do him one year and then I still do him the following year. And this year Cedric was that guy. So Cedric, after his sophomore year, so his first year at Eastern Washington, I interviewed him and like he was so like very off the radar at that point. Like he had a 14 usage rate, but was like the greatest role player in college basketball. He did everything. He blocked shots, he played defense, he rebounded his butt off, he made really good connective passes. Like that was all there. When I interviewed him, like first off, I love like Cedric Howard as a dude, like the most determined man I've ever spoken to. Like I got off the phone with him and I told my wife, like I'm ready to run through a brick wall after talking to Cedric Howard. Like he was so like, oh, I'm going to shoot. I'm in the gym every day. I'm getting up my shots. Like I'm going to take more of them and they're going to go win.
Well, like, and you interview prospect, like you do this. So you're not going to talk down on anyone, but you have a frame of reference here about
Cedric is like, honest to God, like I think the most determined man I've ever spoken to. And like, not just in like a prospect interview sense, like of people I've spoken to in my life, like top 2% determination level. Like he was dead serious about the fact that he was going to shoot more, and his volume went from 2.6 threes per 100 to 7.7, and he held this efficiency. So I think that with the determination, they brought the skills coach who worked on the jumper with him over to Washington State as well. And he mentioned to me, I spoke to him this offseason for the No Stone article, and he was saying the same thing, that like this year it's been about the ball skills. I do think when he was lower usage and more in that energy role as a sophomore, his like team defense was quite good. And like it was still good last year. But I just can't, part of me wonders, like in his handle, like needs a lot of work. Like when we're talking about like
if he goes downhill, he will like spin 9 times out of 10 to try to protect his dribble because he's worried about it getting poked. And that was in like the Big Sky.
Yes. Yeah. And like he just like there was a lot of places too where it's like, okay, he uses those physical gifts you talked about to like get by the first guy. And he is like not considered looking at that next level of the defense yet. And then like all of a sudden he's got to force something bad or he turns it over or whatever. Like that progression of like, I've got the ball, I'm looking at where the help is coming from, and now I'm going to beat my man and then deal with that. But I've already looked there. Like that's got to come along. His process has to be better as a driver. But part of me just wonders, like, the guy I wrote about with him after his sophomore year was like Javonte Green, who granted is like a guy who's a margins player who's in and out of the league. But like part of me wonders, like, if he just plays so hard and he's so athletic and he just makes things happen and he rebounds and he defends and like he can be kind of entirely off the ball. Like, is that a path for him to at least get a foot in the door? And then maybe those other skills can keep coming along. And now that he can shoot, I think that's a much easier sell than it was when it's like, oh, and I don't know if he can shoot, and he's just going to kind of have to cut all the time. Like now I think we're getting closer to something something real.
I think it's close to something real. Yes. I mean, we are framing it as Cedric is this sort of kind of Cinderella story from where he began. And in many ways he is, but we need to be clear that like you and I love Cedric Howard. Like,
yeah.
If everyone felt about Cedric Howard the way that we feel about him, then he would be in mocks like today as at least a second round prospect.
Mm-hmm.
I
have him there. I'm going to be honest. I have him there. Like
you're a cultured man.
I just buy it. Like I just buy the overall efficiency, the productivity, and I buy the guy. And like, I just think it's going to get there with how well he scores, the defense, the measurements. Like I'm willing to take a chance on it while fully acknowledging that like ball skill wise, there's not a worse player that's a wing in my top 60 when it comes to like dribbling and attacking the basket.
And you know, the NBA, I mean, recent NBA history where a lot of the ball skills has shifted to wing size players has shown that like ball skills can improve in the NBA because there is more space. In college, you are operating in closer quarters all of the time. So if you are a big player and your handle is naturally a little bit higher, then it's going to get snuffed a lot in college, whereas you might have some more space in the NBA. But there aren't many regular NBA players, even ones who operate off the ball, who don't have the ability to like use their dribble to create a jumper for themselves that they can hit over a contest. I mean, the bag is there, whether or not they display the bag all of the time.
Yes.
If we're talking about the eventual role for him, you know, he is athletic enough to be like a true blue wing, but I want to see what his measurements are around combine time because, you know, we both use the term not quite wing. For someone who is a low dribble kind of raw ball skills guy, if he were 6'9", I wouldn't care. I really would.
Sure.
But he's 6'6", and you're not going to find many players who are 6'6" in the league who like didn't operate at point at some point in their life for, you know, a youth team, college team, or whatever. So That's more the question with him, is just how far along those skills come. Now, I will say, if there's some world where these ball skills really, like, they pop to the degree that his shooting volume and efficiency popped over the last 12 months, and you feel like he really can operate as a secondary guy, I mean, this is sort of the dream of dreams.
Sure.
But if he can do that, then he should, like, you could take him in the top 20 and I wouldn't blame you. Like that, that player who can operate as a secondary person or even a tertiary person off the dribble, who can just sort of like run a pick and roll and know what they're doing and be able to drive and be able to shoot threes and defend with the tools and with the passion that I think that he can. Those are like my switchblades, my sons. That's, you know, Derik White, Herb, Jalen Suggs. I mean, those are like the future of what role players are in the NBA. So I'm not saying that Cedric, I don't think he will get there, but hopefully, you know, you have connections to him. He's watching this. He uses what I just said as motivation. And then, you know, I run through a brick wall for being too low on him. Like he is someone I really, really want to pay close attention to this year, because it's hard to just say like ball skills. That encompasses a lot of decision making, a lot of physical development.
It's handle stuff. Yeah.
It's a lot. And it's a lot to ask of him, but he wants the smoke. So we'll see how much of it he can handle.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what he looks like this year. And I do think that, like, again, it's one of those things, it's like you don't want to get too caught up into this, because to your point, like the guys who stick in the NBA tended to have been like major playmakers for their college team. Like when he was in that more reduced role as a sophomore, his assist rate was good. His turnover rate was like lower. Like he did a good job of just keeping the ball moving and like making those good 0.5s. But like at the NBA, like you said, like everybody's got to be able to attack and do a little bit of something. And that is the question.
This time a year ago, I was really excited about Zach Austin going to Pitt.
100%. Me too. Yeah.
Right. And like, he didn't develop his ball skills because they had, you know, Jalen Lowe and a freshman named Bub Carrington and Isaiah Leggett, and it's just sort of wasn't in the cards for him. I think, you know, Cedric's circumstances going with his coach to Washington State with the intel that you've got are going to be a little bit different, but it's just sort of like they're still going to try to win. And even though his personal focus will be on developing those ball skills, he's got to use those ball skills well enough to drive his team to winning for this to be a real thing, which will be hard.
Yeah. Let's get a little bit into some of the freshmen here a little bit. So the last guy that we're going to talk about is somebody who my article that's going to be up by the time you're listening to this, most likely. It's on Derik Queen. So Derik Queen is a super funky big man who's going to be playing at Maryland this year. He was a McDonald's All-American last season. Was sort of dominant on the Under Armour circuit, played there instead of EYBL. Going to Maryland, so kind of staying true to the Under Armour lineage by going there. Co-MVP of the McDonald's All-American game. He's 6'10", 246 is what Maryland has him listed at. Was a 5-star player, played alongside Cooper Flagg at Montverde, was the leading scorer in EYBL Scholastic Conference play, was second in that league. And that's like your Montverdes, your IMGs, like all those big schools that like 90% of the prospects you hear about go. He led that league in points, in rebounds per game, not points per game. Sorry, it's rebounds per game. He was second in the league in field goal percentage, 5th in free throw percentage, and 8th in points per game. Dynamite passer is like what I am most excited about. He can score the ball. Like he was 8th in this league in scoring, 67.8% on half court rim attempts per synergy. Like really smooth, like big man. I hate to use this comp because people get the wrong idea.
Do it.
So I grew up in Illinois, and when I was a kid, there was a player in the state playoffs that my dad was like, look at this guy's footwork. Like, just watch how light this guy is on his feet. It was Eddie Curry, who now is like, you hear Eddie Curry and you're like, oh, that guy stunk or whatever. But like, just the grace at which he moves reminds me of like being a kid and my dad being like, look at this guy on TV. Like, this is what you need to do. And then I'm like the slowest man in the world and couldn't do any of it. That's
it's okay.
Yeah. But that's what I see is like, he's just so polished and fluid in this face-up game. He's got a great handle. Really, really interesting self-creator and strong to the point that like at least at the high school level, like easily displacing guys, getting where he wants and getting buckets, but a stellar passer, like positive assist turnover ratio, and on a team with Cooper Flagg, with Liam McNeely, with Asa Newell, 2 high major point guards, and Robert Wright and Curtis Givens, like they'd still just be like, you want to lead the break after you get that defensive rebound? Like they let him cook as a playmaker at times. There is not a pass this man can't make. Like, I was blown away going through the tape that it's like, man, every single pass that you could ask for out of a big man, this guy can do. Does he get a bit too much dip on his chip? And sometimes, yeah, that happens with high school players. But the capability,
a bit too much dip on his chip. I've never heard that.
There.
That's great.
Oh, I love that. It's like I use that in my notes all the time. He's unbelievable as a playmaker. Where it gets tricky is like, this is, to go back to the Eddie Curry comp, like this is a guy who's not super bouncy, has some real defensive questions. I worry about his size because he's listed at 6'10" at Maryland, but he was 6'9" for a long time before that. His measurements are going to be really important. I don't know what he does defensively in the NBA, and he's not a shooter yet. He was stellar at the free throw line, but like the track record of him shooting threes between both Under Armour and Montverde is both small and not efficient. I don't quite know what to make of him. He's clearly like so talented and so smart that I'm like inclined to bet on him. Like, just tall guy who really knows what he's doing tends to pan out. I just don't know if he's got the athletic juice. And even if he does, like, how valuable is, like, okay, best case scenario, let's say, like, we're talking like a little pie in the sky here. Like, let's say he's Domantas Sabonis or Alperen Şengün. Like, let's say he hits like peak offensive tilted 4-5 outcome.
Mm-hmm.
That still presents like some team building complexities. And if you're like 75-80% of that outcome, it's kind of a problem. Like a lot of that player is not in demand when it isn't that outcome. And even when it is that outcome, it's like, should the Kings trade Domantas Sabonis? Like, it's shaky. So I threw a lot at you. But what are your impressions of Derik Queen, and how would you say like your overall interest level is in him and this type of player?
I love him.
I do too. I'm putting him first round just because I think really
it was weird. After I looked into him, I looked him up to see if he was being mocked in the first round, and he's not. And I am really perplexed at that. Like, I know that whatever, it's a wing league. It's going to continue to be a wing league. We all understand that, and that's fine. But the gentleman that you mentioned, to say none of the best offensive player in the world, you know, they buck that trend as, you know, non-bouncy, in some cases, undersized fives.
Yes.
But if you can lead an offense, then you can lead an offense. The NBA doesn't care how big you are. If you can lead an NBA offense, then there's a place for you. So there's a difference here about talking about whether or not he is a legit NBA player, which I think that he is, and whether or not as a team you would want to build with him. So I would say, first of all the stuff you mentioned about him is true. And Şengün, Sabonis, I'll say Jokic, because it's hard to have this conversation without mentioning Jokic. Sure. A common thread that they share is that those guys are killers. I mean, killers. They want to absolutely annihilate you. They do it in different ways. I mean, Jokic likes to dissect. You know, Sabonis likes to bang and bruise. Şengün likes to, create poetry with his shoulders and with his feet.
Just weird coordination that like there
But
isn't really a word for.
he's
Yeah.
the most flexible big in the league. But like all of them, when they get the ball, are like, if you're not putting 2 on me, I mean, maybe Jokic went because Jokic he has his flights of fancy because he's the best passing big ever. But when they get the ball, if the defense is not doing something to stop them, they will score.
Yes.
They will absolutely score every time down the floor. They will annihilate. And so the first question with Derik is whether or not that is who he is. And we will know pretty soon in Maryland, because Şengün was MVP of the Turkish league at 18 years old. Sabonis, I guess, was technically at Gonzaga 2 years, but they weren't planning, I think, on building around him to the degree that Derik has hype going into Maryland. Derik's like his coach at Maryland is like, this is the best young player in the country. Like, I don't care about the flag. It's all about Derik.
Well, he had like 24-9 in that secret scrimmage the other day against Georgetown. Who like also has a big, I believe they have like a freshman big that's supposed to be pretty good also.
So yeah, question number 1 is Derik just going to steamroll people and kill them? And I think he is, because like you said about his strength, he will go into you and just shove you out of the way. I mean, he is not afraid to mix it up like that. And he has these fakes. I mean, they're not Şengün level fakes, but he has enough timing to embarrass you on the block if you don't know what you're doing. And he has the touch to really convert. And if you give him the chance to operate an offense as a passing hub, he will do that. So if the attitude that I think is within him comes through, and now he's one of the best, BPM freshmen in the country, and he's averaging 18 and 10 and 4 assists, then he should go in the first round. All of the aesthetics I don't really worry about. Number 1, he looks to me like he has a pretty good wingspan, even for someone.
I think so too. I saw him up close, and I thought he looked long.
And when at Montverde, when I watched him, he would do a lot of what Jokic likes to do on defense, which is like he likes to blitz, because if you're going to cause the defense to rotate, you might as well be part of the help to begin with.
Yeah.
Blitz, and then he needs to work on recovering like consistently to the right spot every time. But when he would, and he'd get back in, like he can play passing lanes. Like that's what having a long wingspan and high feel for the game. That's no accident that Şengün and Jokic, despite odd dimensions, are near the top in deflections every season. It's because they are in the middle of everything and they know where the ball's going to go and how to position themselves.
They're in the McDonald's All-American game, and I'm bringing this up because I actually put the clips of it in the article. He had 3 steals that all came against ball screens. 2 he's at the level, and the 3rd is like a hard hedge. And like every one of them is just him like getting up there and then just like timing, just like getting right into that handle using his length, like just being like, and there's the ball, I can get it. Like every single one of them. And it's just like, man, this kid he's so sharp, but the hand speed is genuinely like good and a little odd for such a big guy.
And I think, so I watched a game where they played, is it called Pacific Prep?
The Prolific, I think.
Prolific Prep, but they're from California. That's probably why I have Pacific in my name. But whatever. Point is, that was like that is Tyron Stokes and a couple other people. But I'm not as hooked into the high school circuit. I'm not either. Dibanza, I think, was on that team, I believe. But anyway, really competitive game. And Derik was good, but he got into foul trouble and he came back in with 4 fouls left. And like you said, Cooper Flagg, Liam McNeely, these are really intense guys. Like if you are a bit of a wallflower, then they will take the shots. Like you have to really claim your spot. When he comes back in with 4 fouls left in a really tight game in the 4th quarter, it was like bucket, free throw through him. And then he got a deflection, hedging and recovering for a steal. and then he squared up, and as someone was trying to drive around him, blocked it cleanly out of bounds at the last second, like not close to a foul. Like, he was their best player in the last 4 minutes of that game. No question about it. And if you can do that, if you can be the best player on the court in high profile minutes next to the number 1 pick in the draft, like, I don't know why he's not mocked in. I mean, I do know why he's not mocked in the top 20, but it is incorrect and it disappoints me. So I'm ready to just put my feet up and watch what he does at Maryland, because I have a feeling he's going to bust people up a lot.
Like, I just don't know that there was an incoming freshman I enjoyed watching more than Derik Queen. Like, if nothing else, like, enjoy the show, even if he ends up being like Drew Timme with a mean streak. Like, I'm here for it. Like, if that's all he is, I don't care. I'm still into it. But like, I do think that anytime we're talking about a guy, and he's older for a freshman, like, he's already 19, but
he turns 20 in December, I think.
It's like, he's older. I get it. But like, I don't know, like, if still not a lot of 20-year-old big guys that can read the game the way that Derik Queen does. Like, you're telling me he's older for the class. It's like, all right, well then who are the other 20-year-olds that are doing this stuff? Like,
right.
They're not there.
And if you want to talk about like NBA role, you mentioned 85%. Like, what does that mean if you're 85% of a Sabonis Şengün type? I think important question to ask. I was thinking about that today with him. Usually, if you are an offensively tilted big, then you need to be one of the top 2 options on your team. If you are not one of the top 2 options on your team, most teams would just rather go get like a rim runner or, a center who can shoot threes, who can space, and have the offensive usage accounted for elsewhere. The one exception to that, in my opinion, who has carved out a career for himself, would be Valanciunas. Valanciunas has never really been a top 2 offensive option on his team. He clearly is more offensively tilted than defensive, but his defensive numbers have trickled up and up and up and up as he has become a veteran, because he always has a strength advantage. He's a very good defensive rebounder, and he positions himself to where he knows he's going to concede some, but he will always be in position. And over the course of a regular season, if you do that and you're staying out of foul trouble, like, there's a place for you. I think that Derik could definitely get to that place because I like his strength. I like his ability to rebound. And I think that narrow Valanciunas-y lane, understanding their skill sets are different, is one that he can fill. And I think if you were to say we have a player in this draft, he will have Jonas Valanciunas' career. He will have that career. Then that is a lottery pick. It might be back half of the lottery, but that is a lottery pick. That is how much success Valanciunas has had. And so that's why I think that Derik belongs in the lottery in this class. Now, I don't know all the incoming freshmen as well as other people do. I am late in evaluating those guys, but I know what I saw. And I know what I am expecting at Maryland. And nothing in that sort of projection of mine is going to get me off of Lotto. Now, if he doesn't produce, then he doesn't produce. But sure. I get the feeling that he will.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued to see what his strength looks like at this level. Like, that's always like one thing I try not to go too I don't want to say crazy with, but I'm always like really hesitant with like how well strength scales up from high school to college. So that's like the big one for me. Like, if he comes in and he is like just moving guys around the same way he did at the high school level, then I'll probably jump in that same boat with you and put him like Lotto as opposed to like later part of the first round. But yeah, I'm so excited. He's so odd, but boy, is he good, and boy,
but he's got the strength and the timing and the touch. That's why, he's a problem solver.
That's the other thing
me,
too. Is
he's a problem solver.
I also think there's like a real chance he shoots, which I know I mentioned he hasn't shot well, but free throw percentage isn't all that it's cracked up to be as far as projecting shooting. But for bigs who don't take a lot of threes, it kind of is. That is the one area where it is very predictive. And Queen shot 80-something% at Montford, which like a high schooler is great. Like I think he might have had the best free throw percentage on their team last year.
6'10" guys
on 100
don't
attempts.
like they generally don't shoot 80% free
And it's
throw.
the
Like
classic,
it just doesn't happen.
Well, it's also just the classic. Like, are you going to tell Derik Queen to not go in the paint if you're coaching him at the high school level? Like, what? Why would you? Like, so yeah. Right. So I do think that's something that can come along, and then if it does, like, then we're now talking again, and like we go back to the fact that like he's got this unbelievable handle for a guy his size. He has counter moves he can string together. He has that array of fakes that you mentioned. Like, he's just so good at getting guys off balance and off their feet.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I'm a fan.
He's good. I cannot wait to watch him in Maryland.
So let's wrap it up there. Chuck, where can people find you on social media and follow along with everything that you're putting out?
Yeah. Twitter at Chucking Darts, which you have me, my handle. Thank you very much. I'm on YouTube as well. That's linked through my Twitter, but if you just search Chucking Darts on YouTube, hopefully I come up. I'm pretty I'm fathoms deep within that algorithm, but I try.
Yeah.
And I have a Substack. I don't post on that as much as I can, but it's free. So if you look up Chucking Darts on Substack, you can find my stuff. My draft piece is the last thing I wrote. I have a couple things I want to write, including about that switchblade role and sort of the levels within it in the NBA. But we'll see when that comes out. But thank you very much for having me, Maxwell. You should get some sleep, brother. I appreciate you accommodating my schedule.
Oh, no worries. I wanted to have you on for this one, so I'm glad you took the time. Make sure you're following me at Boundboards. Make sure you're following our site at No Ceilings. Subscribe to our podcast, like, rate, review. Do the same thing on YouTube with a thumbs up. And that'll be it. So we will see you all in 2 weeks. Daughter's birthday party next week, so I won't be here, but the week after that we'll be back. So we'll see you guys then, and we'll be back to a weekly schedule to start the college season. Until then, have a great night.